Hello, my name is Başak Çalı. I am originally from Turkey. I'm a professor of international law at the University of Oxford, and I'm also the head of research at the Bonavera Institute of Human Rights at Oxford. This year, I've delivered a keynote lecture at the 5th annual conference of the Max Planck Network. The title of my lecture was Five Vignettes on Power and International Human Rights Law. The first vignette, which I called the most well-known or the ordinary vignette, focuses on how international human rights law constantly seeks to shape, constrain state power. The second vignette focuses on how international human rights law empowers subaltern groups and marginalized communities. The third vignette turns the tables around and actually asks how dominant powers, in particular state powers, post-colonial powers, and Western powers, have shaped the international human rights law's scope and discourse and limited its potential. The fourth vignette is a very powerful critique of international human rights law's powerlessness, in particular in the context of it saying anything meaningful in the regulation of the global capitalist economy. And the fifth and the final vignette I discussed in this lecture focuses our attention into how power circulates within the human rights movement and how the so-called good actors of international human rights law uses that power and with what kind of consequences. So the main takeaway that I wanted people to take from my lecture was that we have to think very seriously about the relationship between power and international human rights law. But I've also asserted that this is not a one-way or a deterministic relationship. So I was inviting all the researchers to embrace the different research traditions about this relationship and how it should inform our research as international human rights law scholars going forward in particularly difficult times for the effectiveness and the risks in relation to the hollowing out of international human rights law in the current political environment. We had very many lively discussions after my lecture because I've given not one account, even two, but actually 5 of the accounts between the relationship. And there was a question that was asked to me about which of these accounts that I favor or I'm more interested in. My key message was that I don't really favor one of these accounts over the other. There's so much to learn from these very distinct research traditions in understanding the role of power. But when I was pushed or when I was asked which of these traditions that I would be more interested in as a scholar of international human rights law, I think this is the account where we try to understand how international human rights law empowers the subaltern powers in our societies. And I see this as a very dynamic process. So it is not something that a story can be told and it's done and just put away, but it's something that we should be studying every day in our praxis in different parts of the world.